The government and agencies finally recognize that we must put a price on carbon. We must factor this into the cost of energy if we want to mitigate and adapt to climate change.
That's the Ontario Environment Commissioner calling for a carbon tax. It's a plan the Ontario Liberal government is working on and is expected to unveil this year. Simon Fraser University's public policy professor John Richards argues that a carbon tax should happen, and it should happen at the federal level and at the gas pump. He says given the falling price of oil, Canadians wouldn't have to pay much more for gas than they did just 4 months ago. It's an argument I'm not buying, but here to defend his position is Professor John Richards. Professor, thank you for joining us from Vancouver. Let me start off with, I think, an important question, which is, do you think that a tax on gasoline will actually change the world's climate, or is this just a creative way to impose taxes on the public? Are you doing this for fiscal reasons, or do you think this will actually change the weather?
Well, I reciprocate. Thank you for having invited me. This is my first occasion to talk with you, and so thank you for having made the invitation. As you should, a tough question. What will a 25-cent per liter gasoline and diesel fuel tax do, which is roughly the carbon tax that I proposed in the Vancouver Sun op-ed? Not much. It'll do a little. It will break perhaps the inertia in Canada where our federal government has refused to do anything substantive on this file for the last decade. I wrote the op-ed that inspired you to call me in the Vancouver Sun, and I wrote it somewhat tongue-in-cheek, saying the premiers want more money out of Ottawa. Ottawa has quietly said to them, you want more money, you raise your own taxes. And now we're beginning to see what may be the outcome. It may be that Ontario and Quebec agree that they need more money, that they're going to tax a bit more, and simultaneously do a bit of good for climate change.
But, I mean, I have read the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's the UN scientific body that studies this. And they say even if we had imposed the Kyoto Protocol, if every country had actually followed it, the difference in the world temperature a century from now would be a microscopic fraction of 1 degree. And Canada is representing only less than 2% of that. So how could, the tiny dip in the use of fossil fuels in a province, in a country as small as, I just would like you to concede that this isn't going to save the world at all. It's just using save the world as a way to say, so stop opposing tax increases. I mean, I'd like you to come out and say, here's a good way to raise revenue. I want you to admit that this won't do a thing for the weather.
Let me satisfy you. The most immediate thing this would do is raise some money for social services. And I come out of this old Saskatchewan tradition of Tommy Douglas, Alan Blakeney. You can see by the white hair and the 1960s style of dress that I am not young and under 30. But it is an honorable tradition of fiscal conservatism and good social policy. We have reduced, in my opinion, taxes too much since the 1990s, and a little bit of tax increase of about 1%, which is what I'm advocating here, would go some way to equilibrating the provincial budgets.
Well, let me appeal to your...
Let me put it back to you.
Okay.
Let me put it back to you a question.
Okay.
On your side, quote unquote, Preston Manning has come over to the case for a carbon tax. Krauthammer, who we both know is a very distinguished Republican commentator in the Washington Post in the United States, has come out as recently as this weekend with an op-ed in favor of a carbon tax in the United States.
I disagree with him, but let me throw a progressive question at you. You speak to the Tommy Douglas tradition. If you raise the price of fuel, I mean, a rich guy driving a BMW might use a little more gas than a poor guy driving a Chevy. So if you're raising the price of a fuel tax that a poor guy has to buy to get to work no matter what, and if that price is embedded in everything we ship in a truck or a train, every freight truck, aren't you doing an anti-progressive tax hike? Because to a rich guy, paying another dime or quarter a liter of gas, it's no problem for him. But for this poor guy to pay the same, this is the very definition of a regressive tax that's going to hurt poor people more than anyone. Why are you making people pay for energy? You got to heat your home. You got to drive your car. Why wouldn't you have a luxury tax instead of a basic staple tax? Last word to you, Professor.
Well, look, we've all reversed chairs here. I mean, you're turning into the NDP advocate, and here I am being the orthodox conservative economist who says price matters. And
but not for an inelastic thing. You've got to go to work. You've got to heat your home.
My goodness, you've even got the economics jargon in here, and you're talking about inelastic demand. Of course it is inelastic, and of course this is a small gesture relative to what needs to be done on this file. But again, thank you very much for the invitation. Delighted to see you posing tough questions, and I will be happy to come back and talk for more than 7 or 8 minutes.
Listen, it's been nice to meet you. I appreciate your candor, and I look forward to that future discussion. You're a good sport. Thanks for being here. More Source after the break.